Patience, everybody. Everybody's asking for the beat drop. Welcome to Millennials Are Killing Capitalism, folks. It's good to be with you. We had some folks coming over from Black Liberation Media for this, like literally. And tomorrow, as you all know, hopefully we will be on Saturdays with Renee to continue this conversation. Great to be with you all. I'm really looking forward to this discussion today. We're going to get into the book, How to Read Donald Duck. And I was also a little bit late getting things started this morning because I got stuck watching DuckTales, which because of this book. And, now going through a whole like spinning world realization moment of I was like, oh, it wasn't as bad as they make it sound in this book, and you go back and it's just straight colonialism and DuckTales. So anyway, I'm gonna bring everybody to the stage now. Good to be with you. And I think I'll actually let you all, because I know we make the assumption that everybody knows everybody here, but just like do quick, like who you are, and also I think where, like you can mention if you do any organizing stuff too, but also like as far as the shows that you're on or the stuff that you produce, like podcasts, YouTube shows, whatever, point people towards that just to make sure that they know what it is. M2 go ahead and start.
Peace, everyone. My name is Mattelart. I'm a filmmaker, artist, professor also over at Purchase College. I'm organizer with the PSL. You can find me within Our Gates. That's my podcast and my Patreon as well. Also, a lot of my artwork is out there. My films are out there. Yeah, it's probably a laundry list, but I don't want to go through all that. So I'll move it on to Renee.
Oh, we popcorning? Was that the plan?
You're next to me on the screen, so that's kind of what I did. I don't know.
Puff, puff, give.
Peace, everybody. This is Renee, Black Liberation Media, Saturdays with Renee, which is only a thing because Jared wanted it to be, no matter how much he tries to pretend otherwise. I'm also organizer with the Green Party of New Jersey. I am a member of BAP, and I have been doing a number of abolition work with some groups here in New Jersey. We've been doing monthly meetings and book readings and such. And I will pass it to Geechee.
Peace, y'all. Geechee, a journalist and researcher, and also organizer with Community Movement Builders. I said in my tagline, I'm son and Maydie's churn, my great grandparents. I'm also with Black Liberation Media, have a show, Dare to Struggle, Dare to Win on Wednesdays, and then the show that we just left, Remix Morning Show on Fridays, where I get to be Jared's sidekick as I pass to Jared.
First of all, we Amber's sidekicks on Friday mornings. Peace, everybody. My name is Jared Ball. I am a father of two wonderful daughters, a husband to an amazing wife, and I am a professor of Africana and Media Studies at Morgan State University in Baltimore. I host I Mix What I Like, both on mine and on Black Liberation Media, and I am also a co-host with Renee on Saturdays with Renee. And as I said, I am with Amber and the Pips on Friday mornings on the Remix Morning Show on Black Liberation Media. So it's a pleasure to be here. And insufficiently involved with a number of organizations. I mean, I hesitate to even claim them beyond a political solidarity, some financial support and otherwise, but BAP, PSL, AAPRP, CMB, Community Movement Builders, and anyone else I can be down with in supporting their efforts.
Right on. Well, thanks everybody. So M2, I'm gonna have you start us off just of kind of like the why of this book. You're the person who introduced me to it. And yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to say, like, it's a fantastic book. I mean, people should read it. I was not properly prepared for how good it would be, and also like some of the things that it would make me, wrestle with and think about within, bourgeois media work broadly. But Yeah, so start us off from two man, just ground us kind of in this, in like what this text is and why you suggested it.
So yeah, I guess I'll start with how I discovered it and why I found it relevant, and then I do think, yeah, like you mentioned, Jared, really framing the time and when it was written, and I even think maybe even a couple supplemental things that could help people if they want to engage the book, that they could also watch. That's available. So Ariel Dorfman, one of the writers, I was familiar with his playwriting work as a theater artist. So I had always kind of saw him in like the periphery of my kind of vision of different things. And then maybe about less than a decade after I graduated from college, I discovered this book. And I read it, but I read it honestly not super with like a good fine tooth comb, right? I got interested in it. It was interesting, and I really liked it. The politics was something that I could definitely get into, but I didn't actually read it with like a really really important kind of eye until I had saw a documentary series that I recommend everyone watch called The Battle of Chile, by Patricio Guzman, which is about the Allende government's fall to U.S. imperialism and the Pinochet government that eventually would be installed there. It's an amazing doc that everyone should see for a multitude of reasons. It's easier to find now, I will say. You can rent it. If you like buying Blu-rays, there's a new Blu-ray set by Vinegar Syndrome that was released. I highly recommend. It's one of those docs that I feel like everybody should see in life. It's like a nice series. You should really check it out. Do organizing viewings around it. It really is that good. But when I watched that, I was like, man, I need to know more about that period. And then I remember I forgot what it was. It was either when I picked up the book or something else again, when I was then reminded of the kind of art production that happened in that period. And I'm talking about the Allende period, or the Democratic Socialist period of Chile, that there was this massive drive towards, socialist and Marxist views of things and art creation, especially as they felt that they were battling, I felt that they knew they were battling like mass media imperialism, right? Coming from the imperial core and things like that. So this began to dovetail with a lot of my own studies, because by the time I was a filmmaker, things like third cinema became very core to me, what the Latin American Marxist filmmakers were doing there. And, Fanon, people like Fanon and his thoughts on national culture became really important to me. Things out of Brazil, like Glober Roca and his work, Cinema Novo. And when I then really decided to go back to reading Donald Duck, How to Read Donald Duck, with a much more fine-tooth materialist kind of like read of it, looking at it, I realized the overlaps of that era of anti-colonial, anti-imperialist literature and theory that went into art, and how it kind of undergirded all of that stuff. And for me now, it sits as one of those great examples of how to dissect mass media, mass culture. And honestly, I think it's like one of the core imperialism texts. Like, I feel like if you want to read Lenin's Imperialism, which you should, we should also be reading that, and reading things like MAC's Discourse on Colonialism and all that type of stuff, you should also throw this in there too. I think because it gets into the ideological constructs of how imperialism works, its needs, and also like its logic, right? Like its logics of how, and colonialism. I mean, I don't want to like, it's all of that, neocolonialism as well. It's like it's logic, right? Because there has to be a narrative for a multitude of reasons, for the colonized, for the colonizer, for the imperialists, for the capitalists, right? And then of course, yes, like we're gonna talk. It definitely made me reconsider a few things, and then a few things that I was already like, I think this is bad news stuff, be confirmed. This stuff is bad news, and we should not be accepting it. And if we have a hostility towards it, that's a good thing. Yeah. So I'll leave it there.
Right on. I just want to shout out to, I forgot to mention this, but your Patreon, I just want to shout out that, and I am a member, it's just I'm not logged in on this,
Mhm.
but you have you're doing a kind of study group on there where you offer your like reflections sort of chapter by chapter, and then people can like chime in the comments and respond and so on. So I just want
Yeah,
to share that with folks
yeah,
too, because
yeah.
if folks are interested in having a resource as they, if they want to read this book and want to, like, I think that's a great thing that you're doing to kind of go through it with folks and offer a space where they can reflect and talk with you about it and so on. So
Yeah, thank you,
just wanted to
Jared.
shout that
I
out
always
earlier.
forget to like the things that I'm doing. I forget to tell people that I'm doing them, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
to the
just Patreon/Tombs too.
yeah, and
TUMES. Yeah. Go ahead,
to
sorry.
that point, the reason why I did it is kind of because of this. I've been looking to really promote, I think, a lot of texts that look at media and or art that have this anti-imperialist lens. I think we're in a real weird point where people think that art is separate from those kinds of politics or should be separate from those kinds of politics, and people often ask me, they say, hey, well, where are the texts that you're talking about? So I said, well, look, this is one right here. And so kind of the Patreon is really about kind of highlighting those texts. And I know for some people they'll be coming from different, some people come from a political background but they don't have an artistic one, or some people come from an artistic background but they haven't engaged with a lot of Marxism or anti-imperialist literature. So, you know, it's I want to kind of help start bridging those gaps with this. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Well, that's a good segue for me to open up to some other folks too, which is to say that this is one of the things, what you're highlighting is actually one of the things that they make fun of a little bit and also critique, talking about this book. Again, it's written in a revolutionary period in Chile. It is a democratic, like Allende's elected, right? But it's a popular unity socialist government. They have a cultural wing of that socialist government, which this book comes out of. And they talk about how it's a response to one of the things I didn't really spend much time ever to think about, which is that not only are Disney cartoons quite prominent in Chile, and they're largely looking at the comics in this book, which is interesting in itself, but there's also, like, specific Disney employees, and certainly in the period they're talking about, but I'm sure this is still the case, employs people around the world to translate and then also create kind of their own stories to specifically talk about the political situation in the countries and to promote capitalists, imperialist ideology. And so that's the context in which they're writing. They have a revolutionary thing going on. It's being sabotaged in the bourgeois press because there is still capitalists. It's not like a Chile or a Cuba style revolution where they kind of seize all the means of, cultural and social production within the society. And and so they're trying to say, okay, we're going to sponsor as a party, as a government, certain ideological, pro-socialist, pro-Marxist, cultural work, right? And we're going to critique and challenge the capitalist, imperialist culture work. And after the revolution, this book is burned by the Pinochet. When the counter revolution comes, the Pinochet government burns this book. And so, again, also that should kind of cue us to the importance of it. But one of the things they talk about even in this book are the way that they're attacked for doing this by the bourgeois press. And I'm going to bring that up as a kind of discussion point for all of us, because I think it's something that we've all run across different forms of like, you're just not letting kids be kids, or you're just not, this is all just entertainment. Like, why are you being a killjoy or whatever? So I'm going to pull up a little section from the book, read a little bit of it, and then we can kind of get into discussion from there. Um, so they have this section Instructions on how to expel someone from the Disneyland Club. The authors of this book are to be defined as follows: indecent and immoral, while Disney's world is pure; hyper complicated and hyper sophisticated, while Walt is simple, open, and sincere; members of a sinister elite, while Disney is the most popular man in the world. I should note, just as a caveat, this book's written in a period. Walt Disney actually dies in like 66, but he's still very much the face and the image of Disney, and kind of a symbol of him in his own way of what Disney is as a whole, like, corporation at the time. Political agitators, while Disney is nonpartisan, above politics, calculating and embittered; while Walt Disney is spontaneous, emotional, loves to laugh and make laughter; subverters of youth and domestic peace; while WD teaches respect for parents, love of one's fellows, and protection of the weak; unpatriotic and antagonistic to the national spirit; while Mr. Disney, being international, represents the best and dearest of our native traditions; and finally, cultivators of Marxism fiction, a theory imported from abroad by wicked foreigners. While Unca Walt is against exploitation and promotes the classless society of the future. Next, the authors of this book are to be accused of the very lowest of crimes, of daring to raise doubts about the child's imagination, that is, oh horror, to question the right of children to have a literature of their own which interprets them so well and is created on their behalf. Finally, to expel someone from the Disneyland Club, accuse them of repeatedly trying to brainwash children with the doctrine of colorless social realism imposed by political commissars, right? And so this is them just kind of having a little bit of fun, but it also, I think, is still the playbook in terms of how people respond when you start doing, like, Marxist critique of bourgeois, or in the United States, we would just say like mainstream media, right? Corporate media. But that, specifically it has a bourgeois character, obviously. So, Jared, I'm going to pass to you, and then we can kind of like reverse snake this thing. Because I'm sure that you, doing a lot of cultural criticism over the years, have heard all of these slanders and slurs.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for hosting this, and Mtume and everybody. This is the revisit of this book has been great. And again, I just quickly, from my own origin story, want to shout out Dr. James Turner, the late great Dr. James Turner, the founding director of the African Studies Research Center, Cornell University, where I had the privilege of studying for 2 years, because it's through his misfortune, in reality, a flooding in his basement, that I got my copy of How to Read Donald Duck and introduced to it. He had brought a stack of stuff that had been semi-damaged by the flood, and was like, I got to get this out of the house. And I just saw the cover, and just the hate alone. I mean, you have it on the thumbnail. I mean, just the hate alone, I was already like, oh, I'm in. It's like, I don't need to know a word about I didn't know what was, How to Read Donald Duck, and just the cover. And then, and then I was just like, ooh. So, and then later, the other half of the authorship, Armand Mattelart, if I'm saying the name correctly, and I'm assuming Michelle, his wife, that's just what I always assume. They co-authored this book, Theories of Communication, that I used in grad school and fell in love with. So, and I'm not even sure I realized initially that there was that overlap. I don't know if I had put that together initially. But so and that I would also recommend that, like, their approach to the study. I tried to teach it once in one semester, and it was that was the cover I saw, and I was just like, look, I mean, it's just it's just so clear. I was like, the hate is I was like, absolutely, I want that book. And then the Imperialist ideology, I forgot that the tagline was even on there. The subtitle was even on there. But yeah, so anyway, but their approach, I mean, the clear, and you can see it in the book, and I'm even rereading it. I know I've been even unconsciously borrowing from their approach, particularly to your point, Jared, around entertainment and the politics of it. And I even made a note to myself that this is, I'm sure, why I've been saying that there is no such thing as entertainment. That in you know, anyway, but, and this is in part, this book I think explains why it's doing so much more than that. But to the specifics of the question, I also made a note that they prefigured what I and a former colleague would use for some critique of Tyler Perry to call the Mantan Man, or to extend what Spike Lee in his Bamboozled called the Mantan Manifesto. That it's the same sort of, in that context, the black bourgeois defense mechanism for the production of counterinsurgent, liberal, symbolic blackness. And they had their whole thing set up, you know, wear kente cloth, have something for Al Sharpton to chew on in the press, I forgot the whole thing. But the point is, as this book argues, they're just like, they did the Eminem thing. Like, I'm just going to pre-rhyme all of the things you're going to use against me and explain, this is what they're going to say about me. This is what they're going to say about what we're doing. And we just want to acknowledge it out the gate. And then finally, I'll stop here, why I was like, I'm a hater. Because 30 years ago, before the more recent crimes and crises and issues, Diddy was using hate as a deflection popularly for criticism from anybody to his left about what he and others in the hip hop game were doing. So he was like, stop hating. So I was like, no, I am a hater. I'm going to continue. Not that he was talking to me and knew who I was, but just like, I accept that as part of a community, a big community of people that hate what you're doing, and then go on from there. So anyway, I'll stop there, but the book is fantastic as explaining, laying all of that out and giving people even a language to use as they approach criticism in today's world, because the same tactics are used. You're hating on, it's just entertainment. We just want to have some fun. You're thinking too much. You're doing too much. Yeah. Anyway.
Awesome. Yeah, Geechee, I mean, you can respond to that section or just even other things that stood out to you reading this book. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually was introduced to the book by Jared talking about the Dr. Turner situation, and it was on the show, and I literally went to my my cheat code and downloaded the PDF immediately. It was like, oh, and at the time I was in Costa Rica, and then I found a Spanish version, and then I organized a study group reading it. And a couple things. So it reminds me of a comment that my comrade used to say, Salfo, when people say that we have free will and choice. And he said we have just as much as free will or choice as to choose which Disney character your child would engage the minute it come out of the mother's womb. You either get Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck, and those are damn choices. And both of those kind of lead you into not ironically, I know Jared, but it leads you into that comment that the author just said, that the protection of the weak, and I think they spell protection wrong, is the suppression of the weak, or the impairing of the weak. And that's kind of what the cartoon is doing. And it also reminds me of something that me and Ricky Ryan co-authored on Hood Communist, examining where the concept ignorance is bliss came from. And how it wasn't even used in a way that we use it today, is very interesting. And then last, also what me and Asafo started doing, we both have been publishing children books to kind of like weave in particular messages that undo a lot of the bullshit that they are doing. And so I've published one, and I'm about to publish another one, and he's published maybe 3. And I think it's just one of those things of like grappling with how people say, well, music is damaging our people. And I'm like, well, I think cartoons and comics and stuff that are much more subtle are impacting the perception and attitudes and behaviors of our children to even get you before you get to the music that you think is the sole framing of the framing media that you're so worried about. And the one that you're not worried about is the one that's actually fucking up our kids' minds, if I could say that on this channel.
You can. And yeah, I'll tell the story with my 7-year-old this morning in a little bit as I told him what I was doing today. But it was instructive of exactly what you're talking about. But yeah, Renee, go ahead.
Sorry, I was having jokes in the chat.
I see you in there.
So, so for me, this was a tougher read, mostly because like I am a person who grew up on the Disney stuff, right? So like for me, a lot of this like trying to go between what I know of Disney, which is literally the same stuff that they write about. Like it's not it's not like what they're writing about is not applicable to the Disney I grew up with. But because they're writing about comics and characters that I'm not familiar with and how it was translated, like that whole process was fascinating for me. So I got very wrapped up into trying to like merge what they were talking about with regard to a comic strip to what I know of Disney with the TV shows and the movies. And because I've never read Disney, I've only watched Disney. So it's such a different, that contrast of being the person who like I grew up with DuckTales. Like I came home from school to watch DuckTales, right? Like this is a whole different, so for me that was the fascinating piece. Was I spent a lot of time pulling out what they were talking about and matching it to the things that I grew up with and the things that I watched, right? So as they're talking about there not being any workers in Disney in that comic strip, I started thinking about the movies that exist now where there are workers, right? But also like in my mind being like, but how do they push those workers across the screen? Where they like really think about what those were, you know what I mean? So for me, this was fascinating. And the idea that it was written before I was born and yet applicable to all the shit that not only that I grew up with, but that I still watch. Like I still watch Disney movies, right? Like I'm not like I ain't watching Snow White, like fuck that broad, but like I still watch Disney, right? And so this was really, it was very eye opening for me to have to like really kind of resolve in my like really resolving in my head like trying to match what they were saying about this comic book and resolving how much it was still applicable to things that are not written stories, but are the tales that are told via the screen, the TV, the movies. And, Disney owns fucking everything now, right? So you can't get away from Disney. Like it's everywhere, even in the stuff that you're not like. If you scrolling through Disney Plus the other day, I said to my son, I was like, wait, why is this on Disney Plus? And he was like, well, don't forget, Bobby, they own ABC. So anything that's ABC is Disney Plus now. And I was like, shit, you're right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I think they also either own Hulu or it's like Hulu has been
They own Hulu.
yeah,
They own
and
Hulu. Yeah.
the yeah, and if you I did this, like I looked to see because I was trying to think about talking about, and I think maybe we should do some more of that tomorrow, like talking about shifts in Disney over time, because this is dealing with it up through like the end of the 60s. But I will say so I tried to look, and the problem with looking at movies that like, I did something like Google, like what has Disney produced in the last ever? It's like every year it's like 100 things because it's like also so many things that we don't even think of as Disney productions anymore. Obviously, it's all the Marvel stuff. It's all of the Disney Plus shows. It's all of these things, but a lot of it is not anymore like, um, it's not like a lot of it is for adults, which this is for adults too, which I do want to read that passage as well, because that's really, I think, one of the main points that they get at. But I do want to share the story with my son this morning because it connects to what you just said, Renee. First of all, I think the closest that we have in our own memory of what's being discussed in the book is DuckTales. Like they're mainly talking about Duckburg and about the characters of Duckburg. And if you go back and watch it, which I did a little bit this morning, it is just naked colonialism. Like that is all that is going on in that show. And that's not my memory of it as a kid. My memory of it as a kid is like, oh, like they were going around and exploring and it was funny and like they're funny kid, Scrooge obviously is swimming in a thing of gold, but like, it's Zane, and so I'm watching it this morning and I was telling my kid, I was like, I got to watch a little bit of this to do research for this episode I'm about to do. And he's sort of like, why, and I'm like, well, we're talking about Disney and all the like bad ideas that it spreads. And he was like, oh, so he starts with, before I said that, actually, he said something like, oh, well, it won't be millennials are killing capitalism. It'll be like Disney is, going after the bad people or something like that. Right. And, so he takes the side of Disney, like right off the bat, of course. And, we start watching it and I left for a little bit and I'm like, okay, I want you to take notes and tell me what happened when I come back. And because I'm like getting ready and everything. And he wrote these notes, but it's like everything that he sees that he think is bad. Because he's like, oh, you're talking about the bad things. Okay, Disney shares some bad ideas. And he's writing about what the colonized people are doing in order to like defend the wealth of their countries against Donald Duck and Scrooge and Huey, Dewey, and Louie, right? And so because it is imposing right off the bat this frame that we're supposed to that the good guys are the ducks in the story, however zany and misguided and goofy they may be, right? And that the colonized people that are being like, they're going to their countries, they're like trying to steal their ancient relics, like all of this shit. And those are the villains, or at least the people that make the process of imperial extraction more difficult for them, that they have to navigate, including a weird deal with like conquistadors, right, where they have to like deal with the conquistador and figure out, like, because he's kind of in the way because he thinks the gold is his too, and he's sort of seen as a bad guy, but ultimately they're all trying to get like this like Mayan gold or whatever. And so, yeah, so it is. I mean, it is that stuff, but I think that our perceptions from watching it as kids is we don't remember it that way, which is really fascinating. Yeah, go ahead, Geechee. I see you. Yeah.
So it not a similar story. Like, so last night, as I'm looking through some of the stuff that Todd was sharing, like I had this serious urge of like wanting a burger, right? So I didn't go to McDonald's like kids do, but I went to Mission Burger, which is like a plant-based place. And while I'm there, I'm like watching some of the videos that Todd sent. And you know how, and to me, I'm probably using the wrong word, but like the music bed that goes along with the cartoon, all like the Looney Tune shit. Like there's a kid in there and they like interested in what I'm watching. Like you could tell they like, he's listening to cartoon. And then the adults was like, why is this old ass dude listening to cartoons? And I'm like, I'm listening to it, but none of the shit they talking about is for kids. Like they're talking about the immigrants getting off of the boat and the workers and the U.S. economy and capitalism. I'm like, and so I think I had that moment where of like the music bed or whatever it's called that literally pulls kids into it, and they're like subconsciously being planted in, and they might see like an anvil fall on somebody's head, but it's like the anvil is falling on the head of the socialist leader because whatever the case would be. So it's like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, I want to read this one line from the introduction. It says, and it's talking about Disney. He is arguably the century's most important figure in bourgeois popular culture. He has done more than any single person to disseminate around the world certain myths upon which that culture has thrived, notably that of an innocence supposedly universal beyond place, beyond time, and beyond criticism. So this to me is a really core thing that helped me understand Disney, but also understand, and I think when Jared and I start the Imperial 80s series is going to come up a lot, is this idea that America as this young nation separated from European history is somewhat of a young, innocent nation, right? So this kind of attitude of exploration comes from a childlike, loving, even if at times it might be aggressive, it's still a good-natured way of being, right? And that the old world also, and it's another part, is an old world that's stuck, that can't change, right? So the periphery, Africa, Latin America, Asia, these places can't change for whatever reasons, right? So when they go over there and they're actually taking or having this unequal exchange relationship, it's not really of any negative to that culture. If anyway, it's maybe even positive for them because you're able to do with the gold what the native can never do with their own gold. But this idea of innocence, right? That like, and kind of going to your point of your initial question, Jared, you get that, right? Let people enjoy things. The idea that these are innocent tales of fantasy and imagination. It's part of, I think, this bourgeois American ideology that America is really a project that's good natured. It was a good thing that happened in 1776. And, you know, these relationships that they have with the peripheral nations, this isn't really what you think it is, you know. And at the end of the day, when you have people who come in, I always love when he points out that like other foreigners will come in and like the ducks, and I like how Mattelart and Dorfman are very clear at one point to tell you that the ducks are white people. They say it like they are white people that they defend. So evilly for the, and that could be the communists in that time who would come over there. In this current era, you would think of someone like the Arabs, Islamists, or the Russians, the Chinese, right? Would definitely be those people. And there's a line in here that I absolutely love. It says, imperialism likes to promote an image of itself as being the impartial judge of the interests of the people and their liberating angel. And like that is part of the logic of imperialism. Like it wants to convince you. I mean, look at what's happening with Ukraine, right? It wants to make you believe that this imperial project is something that they need. I mean, look at people who say that, well, you know, Iran needs to be liberated so we can drop bombs and kill a bunch of their innocent people there. But, you know, it'll liberate the people there, right? Which makes no sense if you think about it for 30 seconds. But yeah, but it's this idea of innocence that like America, this project is not a nefarious one. It is maybe one that's a bit early, young. I always would hear that a lot. We're a young nation, right? We're a young nation, meaning that like we have time to grow. And going to the Imperial 80s thing, I'm reading the parts we're talking about their exploration. And one of the two movies that jumped in my head was, who remembers the Michael Douglas, Kathleen Turner movies, Jewel of the Nile and Romancing the Stone? You remember Renee, Jared? You remember these, right?
Yep.
This is literally the same stuff, right? The Alan Quartermain movies, right? Indiana Jones. Right? These like this whole concept. And I have a question that I want to ask someone who's a literature scholar, a global literature scholar. Is the West really do non-Western cultures obsess with exploration in their literature?
It's a good question.
Because
but also it's like how much of their culture. I mean, like one of the things that's interesting within the context of this book, right, is like they're critiquing stuff that's going like media that's in Chile that it is imported, but it is being promoted by their own capitalists as well, right? And so, yeah.
I don't want to defend. Please don't mistake what I'm saying here. But I was just trying to quickly think of the question. You know, if I'm not mistaken, the maps that Europeans used eventually to traverse the globe, a lot of that had already been done by Arabs and Africans. So the world, the Chinese had made their way to East Africa, so the world was exploring. I don't know. There may be a I don't know what, something specific to the European style per se.
But the obsession over it, like the obsession that it's something that you must do to become a man or to become a next kind of elevated individual. You must go to the frontier lands, right? And I feel like the literature that I've read from these other nations, I don't see that, right? I agree with you, Jared.
I'm definitely.
I agree with you, Jared. And it could also be it could also be that the point could be, well, we already did that. These Europeans up here acting like they doing something new, exploring the world. We did that already.
I think that makes me think of John Henry Clark's argument that the Europeans came over first as visitors and then they came back as conquerors.
Mm-hmm.
And then Marimba Ani talks about like going to Platonic thought, like European expansionism is a thing that, I don't know if this even makes sense. It happened after, I guess, the initial, what we would call European exploration. Like, so the first part was maybe some, I don't know, cynical exploration, but then everything else. And so I think the expansionism is the part that they gravitate towards, that you are a man. And I was reading something, I can't remember what it was. And it was around that soft life conversation that it was saying that your ability to dominate others or control others or whatever is the measure of being a man. I think that those might be.
I think that makes sense in that the general human curiosity to explore gets turned into something else, whether the European desperation for survival is attached to it. It's one thing to say, I want to go see what's up. And it's another one to say, I need to go see what's up. It's like, so maybe, but anyway, I'm with you. And I have definitely not read the literature, so I don't know.
Right on. Before we move on, I want to actually go back just a bit to this section on children's literature, really, right? This is after they do that part where they talk about, this kind of list of attacks, right, that will come to them for this. They say there can be no doubt that children's literature is a genre like any other, monopolized by specialized subsectors within the culture industry. Some dedicate themselves to the adventure story, mystery, erotic novel, etc. But at least the latter are directed towards an amorphous public which buys at random. In the case of the children's genre, however, there is a virtually biologically captive, predetermined audience. Children's comics are devised by adults whose work is determined and justified by their idea of what a child is or should be. Often they cite scientific, in quotes, sources or ancient traditions. It is popular wisdom dating from time immemorial in order to explain the nature of the public's needs. In reality, however, these adults are not about to tell stories which would jeopardize the future they are planning for children. So the comics show the child as a miniature adult enjoying an idealized gilded fantasy, which is really nothing but the adult projection of some magic era beyond the reach of the harsh discord of daily life. It goes on, right? But like the point being here that I think is really important is that children's literature and children, like, this is a myth that we are taught that, like, oh, don't critique it because it's just for children. Like, and they talk about this a lot, about Disney as this like innocent realm that's supposed to teach, good values and doesn't get into politics, doesn't get into, you know, and of course, this is all BS. It's created by adults who are trying to create future adults in the vision that they want them in, and are trying to teach the values of the society that they're trying to reproduce. And of course, because it is produced by capitalists like Disney, and we'll get into his ideology and stuff a little bit too, beyond this what we're talking about already, you know, he's just trying to teach people how to be either good capitalists or like subservient workers to capitalists, you know, or neo-colonial toadies or whatever, right? He's not trying to teach anything. Like, so this idea too that it's classless, which I think is something we need to talk about a lot, is the point that Renee brought up, which is that the process through which capital is accumulated is totally not shown, right? It's just like they're going to find gold. It's not like, oh, the money actually comes, well, either from that theft, which they are showing, the kind of imperial theft, or it comes from the extraction of surplus value. But that is really mystified. And one more thing, in the DuckTales episode I watched this morning, they're hiring the governess, is what they call her, which is like the maid, the nanny for the kids. And her qualification that they end up going with is, she said, "I'll work for free." And Scrooge is like, "Well, that's all I need to know." So anyway, yeah, Renee, go ahead. You haven't, chime in.
The one thing, and I wrote this note down because it stood out to me so much as I was reading it, is this the legitimization of capitalism and the rich. And they're one of the things that they say in there is, that they legitimate the owner of wealth because that is the person who had the idea of finding the thing that made them wealthy, right? Like, it's not about like working hard or, all the things that they tell people is how you get wealthy, right? Is, you have to work hard, you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you have to, do this thing and do that thing. And Disney's whole outreach with regard to wealth and acquiring resources, none of these things exist until the person has the idea to go get this thing. And then all of a sudden it exists, and it only exists for them to take, right? So that they can be more wealthy. And it's such a, like, there was just so many points in this book where I was like, wow, that is really insidious. Like, that's really like the adults sitting around the table and trying to figure out, like, how do we best instill these notions within people while they're too young to understand that we are teaching them something that is going to be ingrained in them in such a way that they're going to grow up and not even think twice about these beliefs, right? And so I also have a note like Disney equals propaganda. Like, it's how no matter what you're watching, there's a cop. Even like, it could be the most like bizarre, like cops don't have nothing to do with this storyline. But something happens and they have to call 911, and here comes the dude in his costume and a gun. Like, it is so wild how they just embed these things and then turn around and tell you, oh, well, it's just it's just a cartoon, it's just a TV show. Why I hear it all the time. Like, why you spend so much time, like, talking about what people are watching and what people are reading. And I'm like, because the reason you think the way you think is because of what you were watching and reading, right? That I will never, ever forget when I dragged Jared up to New Jersey to talk to my students. And he said to them in that meeting, how do you know that you like the thing that you think you like? And I was like, motherfucker, like, oof, right? Like, so this is it, right? Like, this is all about embedding these things when people are as little as possible and unable to recognize what is being embedded within their subconscious. And then they just grow up thinking that this is a thing. And it's insidious as fuck is what it is, but it's wild.
First of all,
Yeah.
I think we need to have an intervention for Jared and his highlighter. I think we need to get, I get it. No, I'm just playing, but I get it. The whole thing is bars, but I was like, where's the end of the highlight? That was like,
Just keep
that's why
going.
they have different colors.
That whole section, I will say I didn't highlight like that throughout the whole book, but
No, I know, I'm just playing.
there are sections in the book where I'm like, this whole section,
No, the whole
Yeah.
the only two quick points I wanted to add to that is that I noted that first of all, part of what you read in there was where they emphasized that line. I forgot how well it was written, but the point that we are somehow tricked into thinking that Bugs Bunny self-authored as a child his lines, you know what I mean? Or like Donald, no, some grown ass, mostly white, mostly male, mostly certain class-based person wrote that. And it's the same way we get pop stars, we get grown ass men writing for teenagers to produce the future that they want, which is such a perfect way of putting it. And then the buzzsaw, since he was supposed to be here with us, today, Dr. Todd Stephen Burrows, the buzzsaw he and I ran into is that journalism schools are the children's entertainment funded by the parent of the journalism industry to produce the people they want. We went in there thinking, oh, this is about to be some academic highfalutin intellectuals. They were like, nah, we paid to train you motherfuckers to come work for us, not to think about some shit. And that, so it's there's so many different ways. And then lastly, and I'll leave this as a question, and if anybody wants to, because I haven't admittedly finished this most recent reread, so I don't even remember. But I'm based on what you all were saying earlier about the center being Disney, obviously. Is this? I want to just emphasize: is it potentially a flaw if anyone reads this as specific to Disney? And the one thing I'm thinking is, are they clear? I get that they're not saying that, but are they clarifying enough that Disney could be replaced with any mainstream elite media and be argued to be doing the same thing? Or am I wrong there? Go ahead. Yeah.
You're not wrong. There's a line in the 3rd chapter where they say Disney is not the inventor of these ideologies. He is just merely the translator, right? It's like a subtle line that they throw in. That's not subtle, it's explicit, but they make sure to do that, right? I think since this is a polemic against Disney, they really want to hammer solely on that, and I think they do, but they do say that a couple of times, that Disney is not the inventor but merely the translator through this medium, right? And it's really, if I can, when I stop talking, I can probably find the line. It was in my last chapter read. To a couple points here, I think something that's really important, and something that I love that Dorfman and Mattelart do very early, is to even talk about the actual constructive nature of how these stories are told, right? Like, they don't have parents. They have an uncle, right? So you make them without history, right? They do everything they can to basically eliminate history, the appetite for wanting to know the history of something, and seeing it as a necessity. So think about what that does to a child or to a person ideologically when they then get a news story, right? They just want the salacious material and the excitement. They don't want to know, well, why is this happening? Right? Why is there a genocide happening? Why is this happening? Or what some people are calling a genocide, or what people are not calling, or refuse to call a genocide, right? Why is this happening? And how this has like an ideological formation, I think, on people. And how this falls into enlightenment thinking, right? Because I thought the idea, I'm the one who basically should get all the money and the credit, right? The mythology of the genius businessman, right? He had this great idea, and that's why he can make all this cash, and they're able to kind of translate that kind of ethos. Another thing that I think is really interesting is the concept of children in the book, right? And there's really 2 concepts. And one is like children from the core, right? And teaching them that exploring the peripheral world, right, is something that they have a right to do. And actually it would benefit the children, because they think that people in the periphery in the colonized lands are really children, right? But they're children who can't develop. Right. So your childlike duty, if you're from the core, is to go to these outer lands and help these children who will never be able to rise up and get to a certain point. And that's how you'll become an adult. I mean, this is sick, but this is colonial thinking, right? This is colonized thinking. And two other points. Yeah, you know, in the thought about the expansion, I'm reminded of like what Lenin says, that capitalism needs to expand. It is so this is like like justifying that expansion. And then to Jared, to your point, it's so funny because like we're like talking about the comic book, right? So then I think about like right wing critiques of things, you know, like the really reactionary things, like they're trying to turn people, you know, homosexual, all this really terrible stuff, right? And right, but then we have what I think is a very right, you know, correct left wing theory, but this idea that all these things have no ideology help horseshoe the left wing critique with the right wing critique and just make us all cranks. Right? Oh, you're all cranks because you just can't accept that Disney really is without ideology, or the normative ideology that Disney has is just what should be, right? It's like it's capitalist realism, it's liberalism, realism, whatever you want to call it. But they get to like, you know, horseshoe us with like high reactionary, racist, misogynistic, homophobic people because we have this critique of like the Disney empire.
Yeah. So as I was thinking about Jab's question, I see like the American Project as like this big ass university, and the entertainment department is like obviously Disney, and all the department heads are like world renowned people. And as I'm rereading this, the first time I read it, I was in Costa Rica, and this is before I went to Nicaragua and studied in Nicaragua. And I know we might talk about like the labor struggles then and employees, and then even currently still. But there was a line where even as Ntume was talking about the uncle, that they said that the employees look at Disney as a father figure. And then as he became more wealthy and had more power, they was like, he's like this rich uncle. And then he had a line where he says, like, the only son of a bitch in this studio is me. And then again, that fast forwards me to Nicaragua, when they was like, the U.S. president was like, Somoza is a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. So it's kind of like Disney is American Project son of a bitch, and that's the same in each category of thought. So entertainment is just one of them. But if you want to go somewhere else, like there's somebody who still runs cover or even leads people into being sympathetic or accepting the American Project, however they do so. So that's kind of how I see it. So I do think people will be doing a disservice, themselves a disservice, that they only kind of like, oh, it's just Disney, because they have damn near cornered the whole entertainment apparatus in the U.S. And I mean, they own ESPN too. So when you talk about Prime and Shador Sanders, they got that too.
Absolutely. I do want to spend a minute because this is fascinating to me. I mean, one, I think we should talk a little bit about Disney and about Carl Barks, which, by the way, I totally thought this was I was like, this has to be a fake name. Like, you named him Carl Barks, like, you know, obviously rhyming with Karl Marx, but no, it's actually so I looked up this guy's Wikipedia page. So Carl Barks, just to clarify, he's the primary creator of Donald Duck cartoons and comics. You know, the primary kind of animator and, you know, kind of creative mind. His own story is fascinating to me, and partially because there's the kind of personal connection. Like, he grew up about an hour away from where I grew up, but he grew up in Southern Oregon in Klamath County, but he's born there in 1901. Klamath County is settled in the late 1800s. So his parents were right on the forefront of settler colonialism in Oregon. They're kind of like failed farmers, which is a common, you know, kind of settler story of you go out and you have this mythology again that, you know, go to our talk about Jay Sakai with Nick Estes a few weeks ago, you think that you can sort of make it as an individual community. This is also a part of the kind of, American dream, this idea of you can have a single family farm and be self-sufficient. It's a settler mythology. And, it doesn't really work that well. They move around a bit. He has a bunch of little jobs, and he creates sort of the image of Donald and of Scrooge. And he talks about that. I mean, they talk about that in the book, but even the way that he talks about it, Carl, is interesting because it's sort of like, let me see if I can find it. Where is it on the Wikipedia page? I'm not finding it right now. That's all right. But, Donald Duck is like more of the bumbling, like kind of like he's always kind of trying to figure out like, okay, I need to go do this work or do that work or whatever. So he has like odd jobs and like scams and things like that he tries to like do to like make money. Whereas Scrooge is obviously seen to be, as they talk about it in the book, but also as Barks talked about it himself, as like he's so intelligent, he's so basically that because he's so smart and so good and hardworking is why he's so rich, right? And so again, like they're trying to, you know, but it's very funny because even within the comics, if you actually look at like why he's rich, it's because he's constantly like stealing gold from indigenous people, like, you know, but so anyways, I don't know if any of you all wanted to say anything about that, but the other thing about Disney, I'll just share quickly, is that of course he was a rabid anti-communist, which is a really important thing. He's a really important figure in the Cold War. This is just from a Guardian article, but talks about he branded some former animators communists, said the Screen Actors Guild was a communist front, and labeled it a 1941 strike that hit his studio a communist plot. He even contacted the FBI about alleged communist infiltration. When his cartoonists tried to form a union, they brought in armed guards. He also fired organizers, cut wages, and slashed the opening hours of the studio coffee shop. At one point, he faced a strike picket. Disney had to be physically restrained from attacking the leader of the industrial action. But it was his in private life that was most disturbing images of Disney emerge. In fact, Disney himself was trapped by his creation and public image. I'm not Walt Disney anymore. Walt Disney is a thing. It's grown to be a whole different meaning than one man. He once complained, blah, blah. He's affected. Yeah, that's actually like not that important, that part. But
I am calling bullshit on he had to be held back.
Yeah. Exactly. The union probably had to be
let him go. Let him go. And wasn't there some overlap with land and the CIA in Florida for where the Disney park got? Didn't he give up land for the? Oh man, I should have looked that up.
I think there is some really weird stuff around the Disney, the Disney World, like, which is just this massive plot of land. Also, I was just reminded going through this that It's a Small World was written during the Cuban Missile Crisis for the Seattle World's Fair as a way to combat communism. And so, but anyway, there's a lot to all of that. And I think what's cool about this book is that you get this third world Marxist perspective of like dismantling the ideology behind Walt Disney, which I do think is an ideology that we see throughout a lot of bourgeois media, even though some of the forms that it takes in Disney, like the total elimination of parents, is something that I think is somewhat passé at this point. That you do find attempts to kind of move parents out of the picture in children's stuff, and there is a long tradition of that, that they also acknowledge in the book, but not to the degree that you see within Disney, where, as they point out in the book, it's actually also to take away the literal reproduction, so it's everything is done to remove either the working class and how things are produced within society in a kind of material capitalist sense, but also to literally explain where do children come from and how do they become adults and how do they have children. All of that is taken out, which is sort of again treated as like, oh, he's just doing this to maintain the innocence of children, but it also is you know to just abstract them out of what produces them and who cares for them and all of these kind of things that are really actually quite important. So yeah,
Can
I've said enough. Is there other thing? Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to ask because to that point, I always first think of that film, the film The Outsiders, and is that going to be in your '80s series? Does that somehow figure? Maybe not so much. I don't know if it has I don't remember if there's a Cold War overlap, but the parentless piece of it, like there's not one even reference, if I remember correct, to parents in that film and like films like that. And then what I think, and I think somewhere in this book, the point is, I think I'm getting it from here that this is what allows for children who view it to become more susceptible to whatever the messaging is, that abstraction that you're talking about. That and I don't know if I'm where I'm getting, maybe I'm wrong, but that this whole parentless piece of it allows for more immersion for the youthful audience. Yeah. Anyway, I don't. That was
Yeah,
it.
go ahead, to me. Yeah.
Well, I watched The Outsiders last year, coincidentally, and that's actually another version of noble savagery. Right? There is an obsession with orphanage and people being orphans in Western literature, right? I mean, go back to Peter Pan, right? The chosen orphan, and what's the whole thing? His parents didn't love him, so he left them, right? And he becomes the ward of all these orphans of unwanted children. So he's he's like the most noble of savages in that kind of way, and that's why he's endowed with like magic powers. I mean, a lot of this stuff is just really, really diabolical in the brain. But you know what's funny? You mentioned that, yeah, and they don't mention the parents in the. But I'd be curious how the book goes, because I know the Outsiders book to movie had a big kind of edit that was highly criticized. Yeah.
So I just want to say something
Go ahead.
quickly about this. I did study children's literature in undergrad, and like one of the things is, so this is super common. Like all of if you go back to like Grimm's fairy tales, like you go back to a lot of stuff, it's not always that people don't have parents, but in order for the argument, here's the argument, the kind of bourgeois argument for this technique is that it allows children to read something where they can see themselves as a protagonist and as having autonomy, right? And as being able to then like have their own, to explore their own world without parents who obviously would say, hey, don't do that, that's dangerous, or stuff like that, right? And so it's a very common technique within Western literature, and it's justified on those kind of ends of like, in order to make it really exciting. I mean, think Harry Potter also kind of does this, right? He goes away to boarding school, and I think he's an orphan first, right? But he like, he also goes away from the kind of parental unit that he's then taken into, right? And so it's really common in terms of creating a world for children where they are seen to be able to like just explore and participate in these kind of, battles with good and
Right,
evil and
because
stuff
then
like
either
that.
the parent is has to be absented, or they're bad parents, right? Or the story can't have, because you're right, everything be like, who's gonna let their kids brawl, fight, kill each other in the park or whatever?
Right. So that's the argument. But like, I think this book does a really good job of indicting like all that is wrong with that argument and saying like, well, who's making that decision and why? Like, what is the real reason in terms, like, it's nice to say, oh, well, it makes for better stories for children. But like, again, it opens up to what you raised, Jared, of like, okay, so then there is then messaging coming through in these stories, right? And there's no other filter for, contravening that messaging. And it also kind of teaches kids, I think probably also, that you know, maybe Disney is better at teaching your kids than you are. Like, they need to listen. Hey, I mean, same thing with my kid this morning, of me trying to have a little bit of a discussion around this. And he's sort of like, well, who are you to criticize Disney? Like, as a
Oh,
7-year-old, you
wow.
know?
Well, there are celebrities moving to parts in Africa and having their children raised by AI and promoting that on their Instagram. So maybe they're onto something.
I knew that was coming.
They got a lot of milkshake over there too. Bunch of milkshake.
Yeah, terrible. Shame on all of you and everybody laughing in the chat. Shame.
Oh, man.
But no, that
Anybody
is
have
deep,
anything
though.
else
Yeah.
you want to add on
Please,
that?
yeah.
Or
Yeah,
I can,
just a couple points. Yeah, because I have a 19-month old, and now the only thing we let her watch right now is Bluey. But I have to say, in now seeing 3 seasons of Bluey, while we see Bluey's parents, and they do mention that Bluey does have parents, no one ages. No one ages, right? So that thing has stayed with. But I think another thing to kind of go back to the older, the older things about production. So Mattelart and Dorfman do also to talk about the limitations of women in the text, right? And no one gives birth, right? So reproduction. So this idea of production, they have to eliminate any idea of production. Things are not made, they just happen to be, right? Which just helps capitalism, right? Because if there's going to be no analysis of production, there's going to be no analysis of birth, of the labor that women give, of anything, of the labor that anything happens on this planet. It just happens, right? And they're here. They're all like magic, like bing, right? And they just come, and we can then just take, right? And I mean, and it's always funny, like when they say, like, the king goes, "Oh, we don't really need this gold. Just take it, just have it. It's fun for you," right? No one mined that gold, right? No one, no one did no one made the gold into bars, right? No one did anything. It just happened to be that way.
yeah, I'm going to read. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I didn't know if we could talk about I guess some of the labor, but in the book it was talking about how, well, in capitalist economy, which Disney will be housed, like all became Disney's property. The labor, there's the skills, like people from like the trash picker, they said, to the highly skilled technicians and people who've done particular work. But even as you follow Disney into the streaming and automation time of 2025, like there's massive layoffs, there's lawsuits, that there's underpaid women workers still, and like it's all still kind of carrying on, if not exacerbating, as we speak.
Yeah, right on. I'm going to share a little section on this that gets to the points that both of you are making in the text. So, and it's more sparsely highlighted, Jared. So, anyways, he's talking about some of these different things. I'm going to go up here for a second. It says the human origin of the product, be it table, house, car, clothing, gold, coffee, wheat, or maize, has been suppressed. The process of production has been eliminated, as has all references to its genesis. The actors, the objects, the circumstances of the process never existed. He goes on, he talks about family structure. This brings us back to the curious Disney family structure with the absence of natural paternity. The simultaneous lack of direct biological production and direct economic production are not coincidental. They both coincide and reinforce a dominant ideological structure, which also seeks to eliminate the working class, the true producer of objects, and with it, class struggle. Disney exercises history, magically expelling and socially and biologically reproductive element, leaving amorphous, rootless, and inoffensive products without sweat, without blood, without effort, and without the misery which they inevitably sow in the life of the working class. Goes on, talks about this a lot more, but there's another quote down here I did want to read. In the Disney world, the proletariat are expelled from the society they created. thus ending all antagonism, conflicts, and class struggle, and indeed the very concept of social class. Disney's is a world of bourgeois interests, with the cracks in the structure repeatedly papered over. In the imaginary realm of Disney, the rosy publicity fantasy of the bourgeoisie is realized to perfection. Wealth without wages, deodorant without sweat, gold becomes a toy, and the characters who play with it are amusing children. After all, the way the world goes, they aren't doing any harm to anyone within that world. But in this world, there is a harm in dreaming and realizing the dream of a particular class as if it were the dream of the whole of humanity.
Can I
wish I
just
had
say,
the bars
yeah,
thing,
that is bars, and that right there is why Wakanda works perfectly as a Disney product. The only difference being they maintain the maternal and or the familial line to justify a monarchy. But other than that, they absent the peasantry, the working class, the modes of production. You're just supposed to see this perfectly functioning utopia, and nobody explains, well, how does anything happen in this joint? Who washes the dishes? Who cleaned that?
Science. It's just science.
That is the point, though, the science point. We got to come to that, because this is the argument, right? Is it's just like this incredible advanced technology that automates all of this, right? The vibranium, just like, and this is like, I mean, if you go to like, yeah, I don't want to jump ahead, but yeah, go ahead. Anyways, folks, respond more to this.
Please, somebody. Yeah, go ahead, Renee. Yeah.
First of all, and two may be like falling off his chair laughing, which is so distracting to me. Like,
I'm sorry.
The parental instinct starts kicking in. Don't hurt yourself,
Yeah.
bro.
But
Because my youngest, who can hear me while I'm saying this, literally hurt herself from laughing.
because it
So
can happen, yo. You can pull something laughing. It's not a joke. You definitely can. It's not a joke. But the whole idea, first of all, yes, that paragraph is bars. And as you were reading it, I was like, this is one that stood out to me too. I didn't do the highlight thing. I just have my 2 pages of written notes in my little notebook like I always do. But you know, this whole, like, this idea of the gold is a toy and the children are just, so you know, we can't make a big deal about this capitalism thing, right? It's all like, it all feeds into the insidiousness of the whole concept, right? Like, even when you think about, like, I haven't watched DuckTales in a really long time, and now I'm like almost afraid to do it now that I
You got to do it. You got to do it, Renee. You got to make yourself watch it a little bit.
But I can so clearly remember like him riding on the surfboard on the wave of gold coins, right? Like everything was about the gold and the gold coins, and he had to get more gold coins. And there's never any expression of like who he's ripping off. Like it never seems as if he is ripping other people off in order to maintain his wealth, right? Like it's never put across that way. Um, and so it's such an interesting, because even now when you think about the people who are like the richest people in the world, right? No one ever expresses their wealth as the result of them doing insidious shit, right? Like nobody ever talks about the amount of land theft, wage theft, like even like one of the things that stood out to me as I was like reading the introductions, and the introductions to this book are amazing, the information that comes out. But that Disney had filed over 1,700 copyright filings, right? Because every time somebody did anything with Disney, right, they sued,
They still do
right?
that.
And they still, right, they still do it. And so, like, everything about the entire empire of Disney is all feeding into this very, very simple idea of capitalism's okay. Like it's okay. And if you don't concede that capitalism is okay, you're the problem. Capitalism isn't the problem. We're not the problem. You are the problem for not conceding to the fact.
Which why Disney would go as far to bully his employees to support Nixon and Goldwater and all those other people.
You've seen that letter, right? That he wrote to Nixon?
Yes.
That's wild. That's wild. I was reminded of searching him a couple of days ago. I had forgot about that. And I was like, oh my goodness.
Can you, Mtume, refresh, because the audience may not know?
Yeah, he wrote a letter to Richard Nixon about what Geechee was just talking. Geechee might remember even a little bit better than me about the campaign. If you want to explain Geechee, but yeah, there's an actual letter that where Disney talks about it. But Geechee, you can go ahead, maybe.
I was actually talking more about his tactics in his company. Like he was like literally bullying the employees, like that. Even if you're not a Republican, you need to support this candidate, which was kind of wild.
I'm trying to find the letter. That's what I was. Yeah, dear Mr. Nixon, encloses a copy of a letter which I am sending to Mr. Leonard Hall today. I do hope you can find a time to give our young reporters the interview they seek. You'll be talking to a high percentage of children of America, tomorrow's citizens and voters. I think the youngsters have a very challenging question for you. When I grew up, Mr. Nixon, why should I be a Republican? As to your reply, I could say only this. I think it will be most powerful if you confine it to 3 sentences or less. I realize such a reply is much more difficult than 3 paragraphs, but I do think the results will be worth our effort. Our crew will be in San Francisco the week before the convention as well during the convention. If your program permits, we can set up the interview much more expeditiously before the convention goes into session.
Oh, he's saying, get on my level with this propaganda. Let me teach you how to do some propaganda.
Yeah, why
exactly.
Just do it real simple. Why should I be a Republican?
3 sentences. And that's like, talk about one of the things Trump is effective at, which is fascinating too, because I have an edition that he rewrote with Trump, and he's like, with a little introduction about like post-election of Trump. And he's talking about like that the ideology that goes, that the pieces of his ideology basically that also can explain why Trump appeals to the American people, and it, again, like, also we could think about Disney as the man being replaced by sort of a brand, right? And the value of this brand, I was thinking also of like, that's one of the things that actually Trump, because Trump was a horrible business person, really. But one of the, beyond like making a whole bunch of money from as being a slumlord, he sold his name, he franchises out his name. Like, so there's a lot of places around the world that are like Trump this, Trump that, Trump Resort, so on, but they're not actually, he doesn't own those places. He has sold his name as a license to be able to make money, so he's like, I'll give you X number of millions to call your resort the Trump such and such resort or whatever. And so is an interesting thing about kind of the, Disney as this person, right? Which he's very much, I appreciate, like, critiquing and cueing people into, like, also even weird stuff within Disney's personal life in this book. And, that they're critiquing that, but also acknowledging like it is a corporation. It is, a capitalist corporation. It isn't, promoting certain ideology. And Disney as the person actually serves as this, again, kind of uncle for people. They're like, oh, he's so, he's such a great guy. Like, we should, we like the stuff that he does, right? It's like, he's a propagandist, right? Anyways, interesting connections there that I didn't know of that letter. That's really interesting too.
But if we could forgive James Brown.
Why do I look like an older Luigi?
No.
Oh wow.
Wait, are they saying older the
Which
cartoon
Luigi?
characters?
Which
Yeah, okay,
Luigi? Yeah,
which Luigi? Is it because he's
yeah.
wearing
It's
a
the
green
green
hat?
hat. It's the green hat today. Yeah. Right on. Before we move on, Mtume, you did mention Imperial 80s. I just want to plug for folks that we're doing that starting
Oh
this week
yeah. Oh yeah. Starting
on.
this week, and Geechee, I'm gonna have to get you your show. But I've
Yeah.
already given my initial. We've given our initial assignments out here. But yeah, and as Jared and I keep talking, the list keeps expanding.
Did you give
in
Renee
terms
her
of movies.
assignment? Did that get
Yep.
revealed?
Renee's
Yeah,
on
you
that Red Dawn,
did.
on that Red Dawn, and I'm just waiting for Renee to start digging into John Milius. That's
Because
all
he's
I'm gonna
trying,
say.
because Ntume just wants to throw me down a rabbit hole. Is
That
basically what he's
yes,
saying.
because the John Milius web pipeline goes far, and he's still alive as well.
So I want to talk a little bit about they just mentioned this in one of the introductions or whatever, but it's become kind of a fascination of mine is Epcot. And so, a lot of people, I always remember kids when I was a kid that went to Disney World and they talk, "Oh, we went to Epcot," you know. So Epcot, it stands for what does it stand for? Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow, right? And it is one of the parks at Disney World. For folks who don't know, it's a park that you travel around it, you walk around it, and you're supposed to be like visiting small versions of different places around the world, right? So you can go have food. It's probably the only Disney park I've ever been to where the food is not terrible because they have a lot of like outside vendors sometimes, as well as they're trying to make food from different cultures. So it's not just like the nasty, like, you know, chicken strips and fries or whatever that they have at a lot of amusement parks, the Aramark, whatever, whoever it is that does it. Um, but it's really an incredibly jacked up place. I mean, because it's all based upon, again, we talked about the World's Fair for a second, the Seattle World's Fair, and Mtume and I went through some of this with the Cedric Robinson book, Forgeries of Memory and Meaning, talking about history of World's Fairs. And within World's Fairs, particularly in the 19th century, but it continued through it gets updated a little bit. There were these hierarchies that were created of races or of civilizations. And at the bottom of these hierarchies were, so-called sub-Saharan African people, right? And they were very clear about this of like there's 17 different, or it's a lot, it was like 11 or 17, right, different races, right, not just like whatever we have now, the five or whatever, but and basically it included initially like skull science and all of this like race science stuff basically. But if you go to Epcot today, a lot of them are it's kind of like, okay, I'm just visiting this foreign place. But still, if you go to, and I can't remember what they name it, but there's like one village for Southern Africa, basically. And it's just like still like grass huts, basically. Like, and other than that, they're like largely excluded. And then the other thing in Epcot that's really interesting slash nefarious is that big globe. I don't know if people know, they probably know that image. I can pull it up in a minute, but it's kind of it's like almost an avatar of Disney at a certain point, is this massive sort of dome globe thing. And inside, it's actually a ride, and you go inside it, and it's like the history of communications or something like this, like the history of knowledge production, essentially. And they tell a story that starts, I want to say they do start it with Egypt and papyrus and like writing down at that level. But basically it's a totally Western history. So the only part where non-Western people figure in, other than like this original, Egypt thing, which of course they'll claim as part of Western civilization or whatever, right, is the period of the Dark Ages where they acknowledge that Arabic and Muslim people preserved European like documents as they were destroyed, basically. And other than that, like, there is, to my recollection, and somebody could correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think so. There's no inclusion of Asian peoples. Like, there's nothing related to like China or any of this. There's definitely nothing on, Southern Africa, south of the Sahara, right? Um, and there's also, as far as I remember, nothing related to any like indigenous peoples in the Western Hemisphere, right? And so this is like the history of knowledge and of information, communications, right? And everybody else is like written out of this history. It's an entirely Western civilizational project for the world. And so Epcot is supposed to be some like future. Again, there's like no, you know, abstracted out of class struggle and history and so on. And it's just a fascinating thing in terms of also just understanding Disney's ideological bent and his like, his white supremacy, his European chauvinism. And, these are the great products of Western civilization that we share and bring to the world, right? Which is, I think, kind of a lot of what Dorfman and Mattelart are getting into in this book is this, this idea of the great white sharer of knowledge and technology without any discussion of the process through which, for instance, technology is produced.
What wasn't it supposed to be like a glorified company town though? Like, wasn't the employees supposed to be living there? And I heard something to where like the reason why it didn't go through is because if that did happen and it was a community for them, they would also have the uh, authority to vote on matters of what happened. And he was like, nah. So I don't like what happened with.
That's a good question because I look at it. Yeah, I'm talking about it mainly at the park level, but it does. Let me pull up the. Yeah, I think you're right. Actually, that's even more wild. This is just Wikipedia. Disney's original vision, sometimes called Progress City, would have been home to 20,000 residents and would be a living laboratory showcasing cutting-edge technology and urban planning. It was to be built in the shape of a circle with an urban city in the center with community buildings, schools, and recreational complexes. Does it talk about why it didn't happen? Disney was not able to obtain funding and permission to start work on the floor. So he died in 66 before Magic Kingdom was completed, and it evolved into a park. But yeah, I bet they're missing out on a lot of what you're talking about, Geechee, on Wikipedia of like there was probably some really yeah, issues of like who's going to agree to do this and how is it governed, you know. But yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that history. I mean, I knew that I thought it was like just a model of a community of tomorrow. I didn't realize that actually at one point he wanted it to be an actual community of his employees, which I do think that point which you raised him to me is really important too, about how employees of Disney, including all of the creative people, were subordinated in their own productive process to Walt Disney, the individual and the brand. Even at a point, I think they talk about it in the book, where there was a lot of labor struggle to sue to even get the names of the animators and stuff like that shown, that they didn't used to show who was making this stuff. It was all just Walt Disney, which is wild.
Which in comics we know was a very frequent practice. If we look at the history of Marvel, we look at the history of DC. You know, there's that doc, which I don't think is really great, but that doc on the Batman the Batman creator and all of that, and how he was expropriated, and it took, what I think was it his granddaughter is the one who eventually got some of the money. I don't even think it's his daughter. I think it's a grandchild actually who ended up getting a portion of it all. It's interesting the thing you bring up about Epcot, which the World's Fair stuff was in my head, and as I've been reading it, and I wrote it down as something to think about. There's also another line though, as you're bringing this. There's a part at the end of chapter 3 where what I believe Dorfman and Mattelart are making a critique of Marshall McLuhan and his approaches, and I want to read it. It's the yearning of a McLuhan, the prophet of the technological era, to use mass communications as a means of returning to the planetary village, modeled upon the primitive tribal communism of the underdeveloped world, is nothing but a utopia of the future which revives a nostalgia for the past. Although the bourgeoisie were unable during the centuries of their existence to realize their imaginary historical design, they keep it nice and warm in every one of their expeditions and justifications. Disney characters are afraid of technology and its social implications. They never fully accept it. They prefer the past. McLuhan is more farsighted. He understands that to interpret technology as a return to the values of the past is the solution which imperialism must offer in the next stage of its strategy. But our next stage is to ask a question which McLuhan never poses. If the proletariat is eliminated, who is producing all that gold, all that riches, right? So what I find interesting is the technological determinism kind of idea that we're going to create this new technological utopia to kind of, make this new future. Now, I don't think they're suggesting that McLuhan is just like Disney in terms of being a kind of imperialist. But what I think what we're saying is that kind of argument that a technologically determinist future still gets you to the same ends, because you're not asking really the essential questions, right? Who's producing this stuff? And also this idea of the past and the future is like it goes in this circle, right? They want to use both, right? And so when they make this future world in like Epcot, they still use these ideas of the past. Africans live in huts. Certain people are erased. They just don't even exist, right? These like concepts of the past to make what the new future, but it'll be technological. It'll have this technologically, advanced way, and everyone will be taken care of. But the world order will be, because these things can't change, because this is another thing with Disney. The world is locked. The old world, it will always be what it is. The metropolitan world is this, and this is how we have it. We just have to make a technologically sufficient world for it to basically survive.
So I definitely got to come back to this, but in the part you just read there, I think I disagree with their interpretation of McLuhan. I don't read McLuhan as saying there's a nostalgia for the past and a utopian future ahead. He's saying you can't interpret your future or your present because the technology that is itself new is reproducing a false memory of the past in the present. So what you think about the past is, or the present is, a false construct of the past, making sure you cannot understand the future. That is not a utopia. He was not arguing. That's why he made that point about doing it this way is like driving a car while looking in the rearview mirror. Obviously, that's going to end poorly. And why he argued why violence was the only way for the marginalized to emerge and be heard again. Now, I do not pretend to understand any of what I don't pretend to be right on McLuhan. That's just how I interpret it. I don't pretend to have correctly understood what Dorfman and Mattelart are saying about McLuhan in this instance. But as I was listening to that, to your reading and trying to quickly read it along with you, anyway, that's.
No, I hear you. I'm not a McLuhan scholar at all, right? I've read it, though. I will say I did read his War and Peace recently, and like you could see his anti-communism in it. He makes a lot of
McLuhan was a Eurocentric elitist.
Yeah, and I
So
think
he
that's
wasn't.
what they're. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
kind of what they're maybe sussing out. They're saying that like,
Yeah.
I don't like. I was like, I don't feel like they're saying McLuhan and Disney are the same. I think because I do think McLuhan was a technological determinist in a bit of a way. I think they're probably criticizing because they are Marxists his technological determinism, right? Like I don't think they were like totally. I didn't read that as saying that McLuhan's BS. They're saying he doesn't go far enough, right, in his critique.
Oh, he was not a revolutionary, and he wasn't advocating for a decolonial world. Although I do think, I just know that there's a debate around was he a technological determinist, but
I'm
team Dorfman Mattelart in this instance. I just want to be clear, but
for sure. No, I was curious. I was like, man, I can't wait to hear Jared's thing on this because I was like, oh, when it gets to that part,
I'm gonna come back to it. I'm behind on everything. So, but I am gonna catch up to that and try to. But my point is that what I was thinking was I go back to McLuhan's work routinely. I just don't know that it's enhancing my understanding of it. That's all.
Right on. I know. So we got about 15 minutes left, and then tomorrow we will pick up this conversation with many threads that we didn't get to. I do want to take a little bit of the time here to at least start the conversation on the noble savage and the importance of that to this book and what they see within Disney. And Tume, I know you just recently kind of written a little bit about this within your notes on this for your Patreon. Again, plug to that. So maybe you could say a little bit to kind of start us off on a little conversation on that.
Actually pull up my notes because I mean, one of the things I think we've all realized about this book is just how rich it is, right? Like there's just so much. So it's like hard to kind of rethink. So one of the, I think, the core things with noble savagery that I think when I was a theater student, plays like The Tempest were very, popular, or even something like Othello, which we go back to Cedric Robinson's critique of Othello and forgeries is like really important. And I had wrote in my notes like the creation of the archetype of the noble savage exists because imperialism, colonialism requires a moral justification for the act of domination and expropriation. We can posit that it is the continuation of the master-slave relationship, but under a new cloak. So, like, there's a new when we go to the neo-colonial era, there has to be a new narrative, because one of the things they point out in the book is there's a way that like the slavery that we understand, like chattel slavery, is still not. It is now currently seen in this epic as just you can't have that. Like that's bad, right? It's immoral. It's of the old world, right? So they need to create a new narrative, right? The idea of the noble savage, right? And the concept of the noble savage is they are a savage person, right? They have a unrefined qualities. They could not exist in the metropolitan. There's movies that are like we have like this. It's like when the old world person gets dropped into the city. I can't think of a movie, but I'm sure we've all seen that movie, right? But their nobility comes in a lot of times where we talk about their childlike nature, right? Their earnestness, they're earnest. They lack civilizational understanding, so in a way, it actually gives them mobility, because there is this weird quasi thing where the metropolitan is also seen as immoral, which then goes into Disney's real Republican right wing moralism, right? That the metropolitan sector, yes, it is the more developed, but morally, yes, there's a lot of things happening that's negative, which is why you see like prostitution or thievery and so forth. But the noble savage wouldn't have those type of things. They're different because they're just unrefined, but they wouldn't participate in those kinds of things. But yeah, what gives nobility to the savage? Their lack of civilizational understanding and behavior. If this is inherent, then the expropriation of what only has value in the civil world has no consequence. Right? So that's the thing, right? Like they use the gold, the diamonds, right? They're of no use to them, and they don't understand them. They actually don't understand why this would work. So if I were to go, or really a white person or European were to go to one of these old world lands and take something, it lacks any kind of consequence because they don't know how to use it anyway. Right. And it is really of no value, and it is of no value to the world. I mean, I've heard this argument when you talk about the colonialism of Africa. You see liberals say this, right? Like, well, gold, it really wasn't a big thing. It was wrong how they did it and how they manifested it. Right. But yeah, I mean, that's some of my notes. There's a lot more. I would love to hear others on that point. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. All right. In colonialism, master slave is the definitive social relation, and it's upheld by various Enlightenment ideologies from aesthetics to race science. So this is a lot of my work too, though. Like one of the big things that I'm working on is how aesthetics is just inherently a racist project. I didn't start this. A lot of it has to go with Clyde Taylor. Clyde Taylor's work in The Mask of Art. Aesthetics is a racist project, right? In neocolonialism, civilized savage is the definitive social relation, right? And that's the thing, right? You need to change it. It is the definitive social relation that exists within it. And Mattelart and Dorfman just do a beautiful job of showing it in a multitude of ways in this chapters.
Right on. I'm just going to read a couple little sections from this. Walt took the virgin territories of the U.S. and built upon them his Disneyland palaces, his magic kingdoms. His view of the world at large is framed by the same perspective. It is a world already colonized with phantom inhabitants who have to conform to Disney's notions of it. Each foreign country is used as a kind of model within the process of invasion by Disney nature. And even if some foreign countries like Cuba or Vietnam should dare to enter into open conflict with the United States, the Disney Comics brand mark is immediately stamped upon it in order to make the revolutionary struggle appear banal. Well, the Marines make revolutionaries run the gauntlet of bullets. Disney makes them run a gauntlet of magazines. Again, they're thinking about the comics here. Um, there are two forms of killing by machine guns and saccharine. He goes on to say here a little bit. He says, according to Disney, underdeveloped peoples are like children to be treated as such. And if they don't accept this definition of themselves, they should have their pants taken down and be given a good spanking. That'll teach them. When something is said about the child/noble savage, it is really the third world one is thinking about. The hegemony which we have detected between child adults who arrive with their civilization and technology and the child noble savages who accept this alien authority and surrender their riches stands revealed as an exact replica of the relations between metropolis and satellite, between empire and colony, between master and slave. Again, great writing, but it also, as I watched those DuckTales episodes this morning, is exactly what's playing out, where Huey, Dewey, and Louie are what he's calling the child adult, right, in the scenario, right? And the peoples of the third world that are being encountered in these stories are the noble savages, who are, again, like, still living in some primitive world where even where, again, like, yeah, the child adults are bringing the technology, the superior, like, it's all a kind of that colonial view of, if you kind of come along with us and follow our lead, then it'll be for your benefit. Oh, by the way, give us your gold.
Yeah, there's this other line. If I can pull it up, can I pull it up? Oh yeah. No, that's not it, right? No, wrong one. But to kind of follow the noble savage line, here we go. It says the Disney parks have brought the fantasies of the future and the fun of the comics one step nearer to capitalist reality. In Disneyland, the happiest place on earth, says public relations, you can encounter wild animals and native savages who often display their hostility to your invasion of their jungle privacy. From stockades in Adventureland, you can actually shoot at Indians. Meanwhile, out there in the real world, the savages are fighting back.
100%. And this is actually, and maybe we could talk about this a little bit tomorrow on your show, Renee, too. Like Disney has done a lot of work to kind of try to gloss over and change some of the really fucked up stuff that used to be in their parks, or like also within their older shows. And it's like really interesting, for instance, what of their work shows up on Disney Plus and what does not. And the ones that, and even some of the ones that do, they have all these disclaimers now. But then actually, because DEI is getting a little bit out of vogue again, they've moved a lot of the disclaimers off of those and now put them into like the description or whatever, so it's not as clear as it was in the George Floyd moment. So we could revisit some of that. But yeah, I mean, at that point that you talk about shooting savages in Disneyland, I'm sure that was a real thing. I know that I think it's the Jungle. What's that? There's a movie that they made with The Rock in it. Jungle Cruise. The Jungle Cruise ride for a while had a group of Africans that would like jump out with like spears and stuff like that. And they actually took that away within pretty recently because they were like, this is a little bit, this is a little rough.
Yeah.
Even
But
for Disney, this is a little much.
that's not the one with Kevin Hart in there in The Rock?
Is
No,
he in it?
that's
Jumanji.
well, that's
Yeah, that was
Jumanji.
Jumanji. Yeah.
Jumanji.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Or
Well,
the
so I guess
CIA movie,
I guess
right?
for
They're also
tomorrow.
buddies
Oh,
in the
sorry.
Sorry, Renee. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, you're good. Go ahead. Finish.
I was just saying they're also buddies in a CIA movie, right? Didn't they do a CIA movie?
Yeah.
I just can't. It's always something. So, all right. So I guess for tomorrow, it's almost painful to consider like how this is still a thing and all the ways in which Disney has like made these slight changes to make you think that it's not still just the capitalist project, but is literally still the capitalist project. Because, oof, like this is, oh, there's just so much. This is why we needed two shows, y'all. This is why we had to start today and finish tomorrow because one show wasn't going to be enough time. It just wasn't going to be enough time.
Two things I definitely want to pick up for on tomorrow. One is that CIA connection. I already found a story I want to look at. But then to the point that you just started us on, Mtume, they also end up talking about that this is why animals are used. They talk specifically why animals are selected to perform these functions, and I think we could also dig into that a little bit. Like it's not happenstance that they're just, if you ever had a thought of why can't we just have little kids in all these kids programs? Why is it always Bugs Bunny, or in this case Donald Duck, or whoever? Like there's so much of that, and I think they offer a really good explanation that we can sort of stretch out tomorrow too. But yeah, there's so much. I mean, the book is,
yeah, for sure.
And it's
awesome.
a short book too. That's the craziest
short
part of all of this that I think people really need to understand is the book is like 70, 80 pages long. Like if you don't even look at like the initial like the like the introductions, if you don't consider the bibliography at the back, there's also like another little essay after the bibliography. And with all of that, it's like 115 pages. Like this is not like a long read. And I think that's also what makes it wild, that they did everything that they did and kept it in a really short book.
Yeah. And we could close out on this point and we'll pick it up tomorrow. But I just want to reiterate, like, that goes back, I think, to the conditions under which it's created, right? That it was designed to be something that could be a part of a mass popular education project around, bourgeois ideology within the culture that was being still held by the capitalists in Chile as they're trying to push forward this Marxist project. And it's also why the Pinochet government, the US backed, CIA backed coup government, burned all the copies of this book. But also, to the point you raised, Geechee, of you were in Costa Rica and there's a copy of it in Spanish. It was not translated because it was already in Spanish. It was produced across Latin America by different, left-wing, progressive, communist organizations and so on, to use it for their own political education as well. And so I think it's a really great book for people to do study groups and discussions about, like, understanding capitalist and imperialist ideology within media work in general.
To that point, I mean, a colleague of mine, Brazilian Marxist, I had the book on me a couple of years ago, and she saw it. She was like, "Oh," and I was like, "Yeah." She was like, "Oh, that's the book." She said, "We were all studying, Marxism in college. All my radical friends. That was one of the books that you had to have, right?"
Mm-hmm.
And she studied in Brazil, So like it is one of those pieces in Latin America. Like they're like, yes, you got to have this also if you're on that part of the left.
So there you go. You have Jared with a really short book and this with a short book around propaganda, but maybe they did it because the attention span of people is so small and they got to
seriously, all jokes aside, I appreciate there is no comparison. There are levels here. We have to the size of the book might be the closest I come to.
It's not the size of the book.
Look, even the state knows he's full of shit. It froze him as he was trying to.
Even the state was like, Jared, give yourself some credit.
Shut it.
I don't know what made it through, but seriously, there's levels. That's all I'm trying to say. We've got to stop it with that.
I will say this. So this is fake news. The book, there's probably versions of it that are this long, but the actual text itself that they're going through is really short and quick.
Now
read.
that's propaganda. They're trying to discourage people from reading.
Jared,
it's 7,000 pages.
No, Jared, I think what's happening is that version is probably Spanish and English together. So once you read the Spanish and English, it'll be 200.
There's also just like, even the version I had, which is from Pluto Press, has like a bunch of introductory things across different periods of time. So it's like a bunch of others, which is still like really good stuff to read. But just saying that the body of the book itself is quite short. All right, y'all, I'm going to take us out of here. Thank you all so much for doing this. We'll see you tomorrow over on Black Liberation Media with Saturdays with Renee.
Peace.